Excellencies, ministers, honoured officials from the multilateral agencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this, the third session of the Global Small Island Developing States Leaders, also known as SIDS. My name is Juliet Foster, and over the next 90 minutes, I shall be guiding you through what I believe will be a lively and thought-provoking debate on SIDS and technologies of communication and information. The organisers of GSL are grateful for the very kind sponsorship of Bayer in supporting these debates at transnational level. So thank you so much for your support. Let's now focus on the topic in hand. It's fair to say that the growth of technology has been nothing short of extraordinary, and that staggering rate of advance is showing few signs of slowing down. If you want to know just how staggering it is, then I'm about to dazzle you with some figures. By 2025, some 38.6 billion smart devices around the world will be collecting, analyzing, and sharing data. The web hosting services market is poised to generate over $77 billion. And currently, 4.66 billion of us around the world are internet users, although I suspect that figure has gone up since I first wrote it down. So what does that mean for small island states? Well, these states are among the beneficiaries of what futurologists have dubbed the fourth industrial revolution. Information communication technology is expected to mitigate some of the challenges that SIDS typically face because of their geographical remoteness, especially by facilitating access to product and service suppliers. The bottom line is that ICD is the foundation enabling SIDS to diversify their economies, boost their manufacturing output, obtain greater access to global supply and value chains, and improve their disaster preparedness, points that were highlighted in the 2014 Samoa SIDS Pathway UN report. Well, 7 years on from that historic publication, SIDS are continuing to make big, important strides in terms of the affordability and universality of their ICT networks. Mobile broadband coverage across the SIDS now covers 85% of the population, while the price of 500 megabits of mobile data has dropped from 15% of gross national income per capita to 8%. At the same time, the percentage of individuals living and working on these islands using the internet has risen to 56% between 2014 and 2018. So this is essentially a good news story, except the progress does conceal many challenges for small islands. Research points to ICT skills shortages, making it difficult to derive benefits from increasing upstream technology. There's also the issue of take-up. In the small island of Cabo Verde, just off the African continent, for example, around half of the population not using the internet said the most important reason why they didn't take it up was because they didn't know how to use it. Not to be forgotten in this debate is the continuing gender challenge in digital employment in some SIDS. In other words, how can we do more to back up the development of women in technology and digital entrepreneurship? So if you could, panel, I would like you to hold those thoughts because we are going to explore each of them with the help of our distinguished panel, of course, who've been drawn from the small islands themselves and, of course, experts from the UN family of organizations. They will each give a 5-minute speech outlining their position. And can I stress it has to be 5 minutes as we do have quite a lot of ground to cover in the time that we are together. And after those 5-minute presentations, I will ask each of you a question, and there will be more general questions towards the end of the session. I would like to invite to the floor His Excellency Jean-Paul Carteron, who is Ambassador of the Solomon Islands to UNESCO and the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Ambassador Carteron is the co-founder of the GSL initiative with his colleague, Ambassador David Doyle. Donc, Monsieur Ambassadeur Carteron, bienvenue à cet environnement et la parole est maintenant à vous.
Thank you, Juliette. Thank you to David. Thanks to him, we started with this GSL initiative and it is expanding now month after month. We have two main partners who are Seychelles, with the support of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Radegonde of Seychelles. We have also Dominican Republic with the support of Mario Arvelo, who is the ambassador of Dominican Republic to FAO. And we are expecting in the next week to come a number of other delegations, other governments joining us in order to implement this new concept of transversal diplomacy that we wish for the future in order to address concretely the main issues related to small islands. I would like to thank Bayer. Bayer, we saw a beautiful movie or presentation. Bayer is supporting us, and I welcome Natasha Santos. Natasha is a brilliant and respected woman, highly qualified, and her activity at Bayer Crop Science Division as Vice President and Head of Stakeholder Strategy and Affairs is key for addressing issues of agriculture, food, and food security. She will speak about a very special issue, which is digital tools which are transforming agriculture and improving the life of millions of persons, improving or being in position of improving if we develop them. We will have also, and I would like just to say in a few words who are our guests. I thank all of them for accepting to participate in this debate. Angel Miguel Moratinos. Moratinos is the United Nations Under Secretary General, holding the post of High Representative for the United Nations Alliance of Civilization. If you did not have the opportunity to verify the activities of the United Nations Alliance of Civilization, I would suggest that you inform yourself, because it's a very, very key and important initiative of United Nations. He was Spanish Minister of Foreign Affairs and very respected EU Special Representative for the Middle East peace process. He worked a lot in the Middle East, and it would be useless to introduce Mr. Moratinos. Mr. Courtenay-Rattray is the United Nations High Representative for the least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states. Thank you, Mr. Rattray. You are the person in charge of all these issues in New York. And I know that when you were ambassador of Jamaica to United Nations, you already served as co-chair of the group of friends of the Sustainable Development Goals financing. Peter Kenny-Lauria, co-president of the ACP-EU Joint Parliamentary Assembly. Mr. Kenny-Lauria is MP in Solomon Islands. He is actually, for him, it is midnight. Thank you to be with us. It's late. You served as an international civil servant in the United Nations Secretariat in New York, and as permanent secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Honiara. Altai Sengizer, with a recording contribution because at the last moment he could not make it, is president of the General Conference of UNESCO, actually, and he will chair this conference in a few weeks when we open it. Malcolm Johnson, ITU Deputy Secretary General, replacing Gulin Zhao, the Secretary General. Mr. Johnson is one of the most respected ICT experts in the world, and his role as ITU is now key as far as so many post-COVID issues have to be addressed. Thank you, Mr. Johnson, also to be with us. Nikhil Seth, I will say that we are close friends. Nikhil Seth is the Executive Director of the United Nations Institute for Training and Research. He has 30 years of service as an international and national civil servant and a wealth of experience in leading, supporting, and managing complex portfolios, intergovernmental process, including United Nations conferences in the economic, social, and environment fields. He served as the head of the Office of the Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development, and I like that Nikhil is with us today because so many issues are related to his competence and his experience, and we wait for him to share it with us. And finally, I would like to thank Juliette, because Juliette has been accompanying us during the first sessions, now with these ICT sessions. And be sure, Juliette, that we appreciate your dedication, your time, your energy, your competence. And now I give you the floor back. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Monsieur Ambassador. Je vous remercie. That's the last of my French. In fact, I'm not going to inflict more of it on you, but thank you so much for that wonderful address. And let's begin now with the first of our panelists. I would like to introduce His Excellency Miguel Angel Martinez Guabe, who is the United Nations High Representative for the Alliance of Civilizations. Now, this is a role to which he was appointed in 2019. As Spain's former ambassador to Israel, Mr. Martinez has built his professional and political career around international relationships and development cooperation. So, Excellency, I'm now going to hand the floor to you.
So thank you. I think it's an extremely timely discussion, and most of you will ask yourself why a high representative of the United Nations Alliance of Civilization participate in a debate where the small island developing state have an interest to see how they have to really engage with new technology, and how the challenge of all these seed countries have to really reply to the tremendous, concern and challenges of today's world. Well, I will try to explain why I think we can modestly, the United Alliance of Civilization, to this debate, and even I will have some a specific proposal to share with you. Let's start by allowing me to make a general diagnosis where we are in the world. And in order to be very short and brief, let me concentrate that we have a tremendous challenge that everybody agrees that we are unanimously together in order to fight the great challenge of climate change. I mean, you are, as me, as everybody, behind that goal, and we have to save the planet. Okay, we have to save the planet. I think the small island developing state has been fighting for that. You have succeeded to really get your voice heard. You have your own specific, panels and effort of the international community towards your legitimate requirement and right. And I think we are advancing with difficulties, with a lot of hurdles and of obstacles, but we are advancing towards this goal. But the second main goal, I think that sometimes we forgot, is that okay, let's wake up one day and everything is green, everything is fine, and we have succeed on the climate change. But unfortunately, we are not able to live together. We are not accepting the others. We are not accepting, that people are different ourselves, that we have to kill and to continue violence, aggressivity in the different conflict and crises. So we have to save the planet, of course, but we have to save the humanity. And that is where the main effort in the end, that is the message I want to convey to the small island and developing state. You are, of course, islands. Islands historically has been influenced by different culture, different religion, with a tremendous diversity. You are always welcoming people who harbor your islands. You have to receive them. You have built up, your own identity made by different, origin and influence in the world. At the same time, obliged to respond to different challenges of today. You have, of course, like any country, any state, any nation, problems of social cohesion. You have problems of discrimination. You have problem of how to combine multiple belief and religion and, inclination. So that is what we have also to take into account. And I think that is what the United Nations Alliance of Civilization can provide to you. Unfortunately, even I have in the group of friends of the United Nations Alliance of Civilization 150 countries out of 193. There are some small island developing states that are member of group of friends, but still not so many. And there has been not a real, let's say, policy or a strategy towards you. And so I offer you that since this panel debate, you could be join, the Alliance of Civilization group of friends. There are main problems about prevention diplomacy, in education, youth, migration, media, women issues. We have also been very active in certain, mediation, cultural, religious conflict, where we can provide certain help and help and analysis and experience. And we are, of course, working on counterterrorism activities as being, the soft diplomacy tool for the future. And we are also protecting, our, all the minorities and all religious sites as a plan of UN Secretary General for protecting and safeguarding religious sites. And with our friend, the Director General of UNITAR, the United Nations Alliance of Civilization, is organizing, putting application, a mapping of religious sites. So we are at your disposal in order that we can work together in these areas. But nevertheless, I think the main question of today's seminar is about the relation between new information and the transformation of this digital world in another area of cooperation and understanding. And I think that's also, I think we can do a lot of things. I will propose to the chair and the organizer of this seminar that we could have a regional or let's say a international gathering in one of your islands. Whoever you decide to take the deal, we will be much welcome with the United Nations Alliance of Civilization in order to analyze and to think together about the future, how we can work even much better and much more in the next near decade. So I think if we are a citizen of the world, if we want to preserve our identity of human beings, if we want to really have our say in our freedom and our responsibility, we have to ask ourselves about the, let's say, presence and surveillance of new technology. I think in the next years, we will kind of totalitarianism and economical. And I think islands of a small state, a small island state, developing states should protect themselves also. So all these issues have to be into consideration. A final invitation that I know that in the FIRA Barcelona, it's international organization of Spain that is very active, already has been having in Mallorca, in the island of Mallorca, 2 years for the World Congress of Smart Island. So I think partisan Jean-Paul Carteron, all the information about this World Congress, Smart Island, because there every 2 years they gather and they discuss the new technology about tourism, about technology, what we are going, and you, all the most prominent people who participate today in this webinar, are going to discuss. So with that, I will, of course, consider that at your disposal. I'm ready to continue to have this kind of a change and cooperation. And hopefully, we will meet in person in the next year in order that we can advance better and with more direct talks to this need and urgent cooperation that I think is fundamental for the stability and prosperity of all of us. So thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this panel.
Ambassador Martinez, thank you so much, because I'd like to put a question to you now, in fact, because we know that technology is vital in helping SIDS to fulfill their economic goals. But could online misinformation and indeed the potential for data misuse also threaten their progress and adversely affect the indigenous civilization within these small islands?
I think so. We had been already working with, I mean, it's not a small island, it's Sri Lanka. After, you know, the attack in the Catholic churches, we developed with some technological company a logarithm that prevents, through the study of Facebook change and information they have, the different group and different communities, how this violent and hate speech, you know, discourse is being developed. So, of course, I mean, like everybody, we are in favor of science and new technology, new instruments for having, you know, the capacity to understand better the others and to stop this violent discourse, but always with the precondition that we are the one who decide how and when have to be decided. I will always fight in order that we protect ourselves from this let's say, surveillance society that some of them try to impose to us.
Excellency, many thanks for your thoughts there and your answer to my question. Let's now meet our next speaker, who is Ambassador Courtney Rattray, the recently appointed United Nations High Representative for Least Developed, Landlocked Countries and Small Island Developing States. He is also an accomplished diplomat with a distinguished career in the Jamaican Foreign Secretary. Ambassador Rattray, it's a pleasure to see you. The floor is yours. You have 5 minutes. 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Juliet, and thank you for so effectively framing the context of our discussion this morning. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, let me thank the organizers for your kind invitation. It's such a pleasure for me to join this esteemed panel, and I do need to say that it's also a signal pleasure for me to see my good friend Peter Kenny Lario on this virtual stage together with us. I think we are all well aware that SIDS are confronted by a variety of developmental challenges, not least of which are the multidimensional vulnerabilities to external shock. Advancing economic recovery, promoting socioeconomic and climate resilience, and accelerating the pace of human capital development are some of the core priorities for small island developing states. The COVID-19 pandemic has obviously upended many of the strategic developmental plans of these countries and just aggravated their pre-existing challenges. Whereas this can be said of many other countries, the impact on SIDS is disproportionate, given their small, open, and less diversified economies. Against this backdrop, prospects for their recovery remain uncertain at best, particularly given their traditional low rates of economic growth coupled with high debt service burdens. Colleagues, in short, the reality is stark. The tourism sector of these countries continues to struggle. Access to concessional financing remains restricted. Fiscal space is also limited, impeding efforts to mount effective COVID response and relief measures. And moreover, the socioeconomic impact of the pandemic is compounded by the increasingly adverse effects of climate change and their attendant natural disasters. What we need urgently is a concerted international effort to tackle the structural vulnerabilities of SIDS. But first and foremost, more needs to be done to address the impacts of the pandemic and bolster the recovery measures that are being taken by these countries. This will require stronger international partnerships mobilized around a multifaceted recovery effort. The pandemic has also exacerbated the severe financial constraints that SIDS face. Their need for liquidity to respond to emergency short-term requirements is critical. SIDS have been exploring innovative measures to stimulate long-term sustainable investment, as well as strategies to gain access to concessional development finance. This is an important means for them to advance the structural transformation needed to reposition their economies for a sustained, resilient recovery. We need to expand eligibility to concessional financing based on a well-defined multidimensional vulnerability index. The UN system, including my office, has embarked on a process towards the potential development of a multidimensional vulnerability index for SIDS. We look forward to exploiting this tool for increased access to concessional finance based on a country's potential vulnerability to external shock. Let me say a little bit about debt because it looms large in these countries. SIDS also need sustainable debt solutions, including comprehensive debt relief. Highly indebted SIDS are unlikely to achieve the levels of economic development required to achieve the goals of the Samoa Pathway and the 2030 Agenda, given their heavy debt servicing burdens. We need, therefore, to explore in practical terms initiatives related to debt suspensions and innovative debt swaps. Moreover, we need once and for all to reform the international debt architecture through sustainable debt restructuring solutions that are effective not only in dealing with Paris Club and non-Paris Club bilateral creditors, but also in dealing with private creditors, which are, I think, as many people know, a growing share of the debt of sovereign countries. Ladies and gentlemen, we cannot address the economic and financial recovery in SIDS without examining the impacts of COVID-19 on the tourism and health sectors and the ripple effects on commerce, distribution, and employment, as well as on transportation, agriculture, fisheries, trade, and other sectors. These sectors can all benefit from improved information and communication technologies. The value of the internet as a critical driver of technological innovation has been made more apparent during this pandemic. It is therefore of concern that only half of the SIDS population are using the internet. This is a far cry from the experience in developed countries where 9 out of every 10 individuals use the internet. The pandemic has highlighted the urgent need for accelerated technological innovation to enable SIDS to reap the benefits associated with remote learning, telemedicine, e-commerce, and e-governance. Digital transformation requires investment in digital infrastructure, including widespread access to broadband internet and electronic devices, as well as improvement in digital skills and development of local content. One way of financing such initiatives is through public-private partnerships. These, as you know, have long been used to build and operate infrastructure projects, including in ICTs. And I think such initiatives would help to reach underserved areas, such as rural and remote islands. Strategies to mainstream digital technologies and processes in government administration, commerce, health, education, as well as in relation to disaster risk reduction and other activities are urgently needed. These strategies must be supported by improved education and training to optimize the productivity enhancing potential of digital technologies. Ensuring that accessible and quality education and lifelong learning opportunities are available to all will be essential to accelerating recovery, as well as to achieving the wider development objectives of inclusive economic growth and social development while building more resilient communities. Thank you very much.
Ambassador Rattray, thank you so much for that presentation. I'd like to ask you the following question, because look, we've seen this rapid upsurge in technologies of communication and information. Does it mean that small island states are on the fast track to defeating the developmental challenges that have really hindered their growth for decades?
Let me turn back on my mic. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
So, short answer, Juliet, not yet. I wouldn't go so far as to say that SIDS are on the fast track of defeating their developmental challenges, as you say. You know, there's a good reason why the term middle income trap has been coined. You know, the countries that are considered to be middle income represent let me see, 5 billion people, 70% of the world's population. And these countries have found it extremely difficult to make the transition from low value added to high value added industries. So this sort of structural transformation takes time, and some of the structural gaps that need to be surmounted relate to the development of their digital societies and economies. I think digitalization can be a driver of structural transformation. My concern is that although access to the internet is now, I think it's recognized globally as a vital public service, it has yet to reach in a sort of pervasive way many persons in the global south. The figures that I have, which is pre-pandemic, just before the pandemic, 2019, is that whereas 87% of people in developed countries use the internet, that's in 2019, the figure for small island developing states is 52% on average. And within these countries, within the SIDS themselves, rural areas are disproportionately bearing the brunt. So they are not connected disproportionately. And I think this shows that most people in these countries and SIDS are not fully benefiting from the rapid expansion of digital technology and the opportunities that it offers. And I think this is an untenable situation. And I think the pandemic has shown us the urgent need for accelerated technological innovation. So, Juliet, I think we have a ways to go. Where we are is just not sufficient. We don't like the position that we are in now, and we really have to get closer to where the developed countries are. That is what meets with our aspirations, our developmental aspirations. And I think we can get there. But the elephant in the room is the finance piece. We have to figure that out. And as I said in my opening remarks, we need to deal effectively with the skills gap. So education and training is critical, and even language barriers. You mentioned in your opening remarks, Juliet, about Cabo Verde. That is also an inhibitor to access to technologies, because we know that many of these technologies and language platforms, it's English language that is utilized, and that kind of shuts out people like those in Cabo Verde that speak a language like Portuguese that is not widely in use around the world. So let me just leave it at that, Julia. Thank you very much for the question.
Thank you so much for that, Ambassador Rattray. Some really powerful points that was made in that presentation and indeed in your answer. So lots there for us to discuss as well in more detail. But let me now welcome our next speaker, who is the Honourable Peter Kenelaria. Apologies for the mispronunciation there, sir. He is President of the Organisation of the African, Caribbean and Pacific States Parliamentary Assembly and co-president of the OACPS EU Parliamentary Assembly. So, Mr. President, it's very good to see you. The floor is now yours. You have 5 minutes. 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Juliet, for that kind introduction. And once again, it's a real honor, a real privilege for me to be here, joining you this evening. Like I said, it's just past midnight over here in Solomon Islands, so I think Cinderella has definitely gone back to the pumpkin. In terms of the daylight, lack of daylight over here. But it's always a pleasure to be here. I would just like to thank GSL Initiative for this kind invitation for me to join this esteemed panel, particularly Ambassador Jean-Paul Catteron, as well as Ambassador David Doyle, the co-founders. Thank you very much for this opportunity and for this platform. And of course, Ambassador Catteron is also Solomon Islands UNESCO representative, as well as FAO representative there. So thank you for the work you continue to do for Solomon Islands. That's the politician in me congratulating you for representing Solomon Islands where you are. But I think in terms of small islands moving forward with some of the issues that were already raised by the previous speakers, it's always good to look at the picture about involvement of SIDS in the discussions going forward in terms of how we can get out of this pandemic together, and even better. And also the idea of not being sidelined in the processes going forward. I think that is very important. And over here, I would like to acknowledge the stellar advocacy work that USG High Representative Rattray is doing at that level at the UN in terms of advocating for SIDS throughout the world. There's the Samoa Pathway, and all of those documents are a recognition about the recognition that the globe has given to small islands already in terms of the voices and the concerns they have, the unique special case that small islands have. And I think it also translates right down to ICT issues that we just heard Ambassador Rattray just mentioned. I'm very happy as well to see friends like Nikhil Seth, who's there, who understands very well the issues that small islands go through with all his experience and years at the UN, and particularly in DESA, before coming to his high position as well with UNITAR. But the idea about small islands and the risk of being left out is real in terms of moving forward. And with the introduction that Ambassador Kataro mentioned, that there is a risk of being sidelined moving forward in terms of small islands' voice with their unique circumstances, particularly on this idea of ICT, connectivity, and connections. I think the numbers speak for themselves, as we just heard from Ambassador Rattray, that there is, on balance, not many of SIDS that are accessing internet. That's very true for Solomon Islands here. The coverage for phone is quite good in terms of phone coverage around the country, but the access to internet is very low. It's just mainly around the administrative capital or the capital city. But in the rural areas, people are still using what they call their button phones, or the press button phones, they call it. So the smartphones is not yet penetrated into some of our small islands. But I think going forward, the idea for us to reduce that risk that is there to being not being heard is something that we should work together to help push that forward, so that we, the voice of SIDS, continue to be heard as well, even in this discussion on ICT. I think we need to have a good seat at the table with the discussions going forward, coming out of COVID, how we can use this time to perhaps reset some of our thinking and moving forward in terms of the ideas of make sure that ICT benefits everybody, including SIDS. SIDS can be incubators. SIDS can be laboratories as well for a lot of things, including ICTs. So, if you can do it in SIDS, you can do it anywhere, as I would like to say as well. The challenges that SIDS present, and they're quite wide, variety of SIDS. Within SIDS as well, we have least developed countries within SIDS as well. So those challenges are there that can cover the wider globe as well in terms of a focus, particularly on SIDS. But I think the need to be more strategic going forward, and SIDS folks are not very interested in Internet of Things. They're interested in internet that makes a difference in everyday life, in education, promoting engineering, real substantive outcomes. I think that is where perhaps SIDS are looking at in terms of that. And I think for a specific focus, it's always good as well to have a focus on issues. And here the ocean is something that technology around that is something that the SIDS can be leaders there of, including communication, but beyond that, the technology itself that is driven by SIDS around the oceans is something that SIDS can definitely be leaders of. And I think for this, the idea that, as we've already heard, it's an inherent difficulty for SIDS to face, in terms of attracting investment, and those that are interested in these areas to at least invest in SIDS is always a problem. But we've got, I think, other examples that we can look at here as well. I'm sure things like the LDC Technology Bank, that is there for the LDC. Something similar like that can also be done for small island developing states, particularly in this space. At least it brings people together, brings partners together to be focused very much on what is there. And I know you're keeping time, but the idea of using our SIDS diaspora, there are many SIDS around that are sitting in quite big positions. I would like to think so, in some of the high tech companies around the globe. I think a reach out to those folks would be a big plus for an islander like myself, who are very proud of what they've done. But I think they have a lot to also contribute back to SIDS, because like I always say, you can take the girl or the boy out of the islands, but you can never take the islands out of the girl and the boy. They're always islanders at heart. So I think they're just waiting for some outreach to them and allow them to be part of this moving forward. So we now have green technologies that are going around the world now. Let's focus on the big blue technology for SIDS, and then focus on something like that rallies small islands around a point that everybody feels a part of. Of course, the general policy setting is there, but I think it really makes a difference when we really focus our efforts around specifics. And I think the ocean is one, of course, with climate change, that's very much related. That is one that we can definitely, I think, rally around and bring international support and solidarity for SIDS around. And I think international agreements already start acknowledging that. We have the UNCLOS, the United Nations Law of the Sea, that talks about regional centers for marine science technology. These have not yet been established anywhere in the world. I would love to see a SIDS region take that up and actually implement that part of the UNCLOS, which has always been problematic because, as we all know, it deals with transfer of technology. But these are issues that we are coming down to the crux of it. But I think, yes, we can reduce the risk of being perhaps left aside, and we can definitely be in the driver's seat, SIDS, moving forward with some of these themes that I just outlined, and with all your help in terms of moving us forward. Thank you very much, Juliet.
Thank you very much for that, Peter Kene-Laria. Now, don't go away, because you mentioned the R word there, risk. Let's stay with that idea. Is there a risk that small island developing states could be sidelined or seen as spectators in this fourth industrial revolution?
Yes. I think, as I mentioned, there is a real risk in terms of being left aside. Of course, the international community through the United Nations have already started to recognize small islands' special case, and that is a big credit to small islands themselves. They have since Rio the days 92 and onwards been very vocal and quite effectively so in terms of advocating for their issues. But I think when it comes to ICT, there is a real risk still to be left aside, because SIDS run the risk of being boxed in to one particular agenda, which might be climate change, or perhaps ocean, and people start forgetting about the others that tie them all together, which is ICT as well. And I think that's where the risk lies. And I think in terms of mitigating that risk is what we're trying to find here. And I think these kinds of platforms definitely help in terms of mitigating those risks.
Peter Kene-Laria, thank you so much for that. I want to bring in our first speaker, in fact, return to him, His Excellency Miguel Angel Moratinos, because I know that you have to attend a meeting very soon. But before you part company, I want to put one final question to you, and I want to look at oversight policies. What oversight policies in your position should be envisaged by SIDS governments who are faced with these rampant ICT developments that we've been hearing about, affecting all aspects of small islands' indigenous society, especially with the young people? And could unfettered ICT developments on those islands actually damage the profile of their civilization?
Well, I'm in Bologna. I have a G20 meeting on preparatory work for the G20 on the issues of social inclusion. And of course, again, I think the youth and education are extremely important issue. I've been following the two of my people who intervene after me, and I know how important is the pandemic. I know how important the climate change. I know how important is, the new technology of the ocean. But again, my message to all of you is that at the end of the day, we are human beings, and we have to live together. And a small island is a small island, and you are going to be confronted with tremendous challenge. Who could imagine that in an island like New Zealand, far away of any terrorist or any Middle East issue, they could have such a tremendous, atrocious incident, attack in Christchurch? So the problem of living together should put in the agenda, please. It's not contradictory. Of course, we are going to have a small island development state on this existential challenge of climate change, of ocean. But if you don't take care of your own people inside your island, they will fail. So the youth program that have for us in the United Nations Alliance for Civilization a priority in our development activities should be part of your policy. So again, I'm ready, either Solomon or Samoa, whoever who want to take the lead, to organize a regional or international meeting and forum about a small island developing state, in order that we address all these issues. Of course, the youth are going to be our main concern, and I think that should be our priority for the next decades.
Excellency, many thanks for your contribution. We welcome that. Now, our next speaker is Altay Cengizar, who is the ambassador of the Republic of Turkey and also president of the General Conference of UNESCO. He is a long-standing Turkish career diplomat who's previously served as the ambassador to Tajikistan and the Republic of Ireland. Now, unfortunately, Ambassador Cengizar is unable to join us, but he did send us this message, which offers some views on the broader political challenge facing small island developing states. Here is his message.
Esteemed High Representatives, esteemed Presidents, distinguished guests, it is my pleasure to be able to speak to you today, and I would like to commend Ambassadors Corcoran and Doyle for taking this timely initiative. I hope we will never arrive to the point where we see whole nations on small islands leaving their countries. But on the other hand, there is a high probability that we might. And this is the essence of this conference. Some years ago, we started to see salt water intruding below the farming areas. This was the first sign indicating that things were going from bad to worse, and this was more than a whisper. Warming climate was altering ocean currents, and even after some 20 years, nobody wants to take care of what is going on in faraway islands out at sea. Hence the growing need for viable strategies of resilience. When COVID-19 struck, the SIDS, which are dependent on tourism, were hit much harder than many. Indeed, the SIDS are acutely vulnerable to such modern ravages. Furthermore, many among the SIDS have also experienced sharp drops in international remittances. This was on top of their already very high shipping costs and other associated problems. It's apparent that The SIDS are exposed to extraordinary environmental vulnerabilities, hence the special risks they face. And in a small island nation, disasters hit every individual. As the international community, our pledge is to leave no one behind. For this to happen, we need to pursue resolute and determined action. In practical terms, it is time that richer nations start putting more capital into the multilateral development banks. Likewise, it is the time that richer nations tax their fossil fuel industries to help cover the rising global costs that their fuel production causes. If we really believe that as humanity our fates are intertwined, then it's time to really mean it. Thank you again for this opportunity, and I present my very best regards to each and every one of you.
And a big thank you there to Ambassador Altay Cengiz for that message. I'd now like to call on Mr. Malcolm Johnson. He is the Deputy Secretary General of the International Telecommunication Union, the United Nations specialized agency for ICTs. Mr. Johnson, thank you so much for joining us. The floor is now yours, and you have 5 minutes. 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Juliet. Good day to everyone. Thank you, Ambassador Doyle, for the invitation to join you today. The last time I had the pleasure of visiting St. Kitts and Nevis was to attend a Caribbean Telecommunication Union regional ministerial meeting. At that meeting, I encouraged participants to take full advantage of the remote participation that ITU has been offering for participation in ITU meetings and conferences since 2010, stressing how important it was for their voice to be heard in ITU as the lead UN agency for ICTs. Of course, nobody then could have foreseen the situation now where we're all working online remotely. And the global pandemic has put ICTs at the center of so many people's lives, businesses, in such a short period. Since March last year, ITU has remained fully operational, and we've held over 8,000 virtual events with a total of more than 10,000 e-meetings and almost 300,000 remote participants. So remote participation just shows how extensive the work in ITU can be. And it's important because ITU's mission is to connect the world. In ITU, it has always been recognized that small island developing states had particular challenges and were therefore priority countries. As such, we have provided SIDS with highly targeted and concentrated assistance in areas ranging from market regulatory reforms to emergency telecommunications and disaster response, cybersecurity, ICT infrastructure, spectrum management, and climate change adaptation and mitigation. Right now, for example, we're rolling out an initiative in the Pacific that will help deliver digital services in education, agriculture, and health to support the recovery post-COVID. The Smart Islands Initiative is one of many projects undertaken by ITU since the start of the pandemic to boost digital transformation in the hardest to connect communities, including SIDs. These initiatives address the specific challenges and vulnerabilities facing SIDS, from expanding access to affordable and reliable connectivity to promoting digital literacy. They emphasize the importance of multi-stakeholder collaboration in creating an equal digital future for everyone in SIDS and around the world. We stand at a turning point if we tap into new innovations like low Earth orbiting satellite constellations, made possible by the decisions adopted at ITU's last radio communication conference. And if we continue to raise the profile of the challenges in SIDS, as we did last year by making available for the first time estimates on internet access in these countries, and if we collaborate and cooperate with each other all the various organizations involved in this endeavor to bring our own specific competencies to the table and avoid duplication of effort, then SIDS will be well on their way to achieving universal, equitable, and affordable access to ICTs. Thank you very much.
Malcolm Johnson, thank you very much. Before you go, because I do know that you have a meeting to attend, and I appreciate the fact that you've stayed on all this time, there is a question I would like to put to you, because we know that the ICT market structure in most SIDS is built around having a small number of ICT suppliers. So given that, what steps, in your view, should be taken to achieve optimal and equitable access of this technology at a reasonable cost to the SIDS governments themselves?
Yes, well, thank you. As you mentioned at the start, Juliet, one factor is that people often don't know how to take advantage of the technology. Other factors include lack of awareness of the advantages of connecting, lack of relevant content online in the local language, and in particular the cost of connection, which is still much higher in SIDS than most countries. This can be due to the international connection, many countries still relying on satellite-only connection, and the small domestic market that doesn't offer industry the return on investment that can be achieved in other market segments such as the urban areas. So industry needs to be incentivized. The regulatory frameworks need to be harmonized. Industry cannot afford to be dealing with different regulatory regimes for small markets where there is little return on investment. So this is why regional cooperation is so important, to develop a larger community with harmonized regimes, including spectrum management, so that the use of the spectrum is harmonized across the region, and incentives to encourage investment. COVID has shown how effective individuals and businesses can be in setting up and driving their business online, often from home. Reliable, fast, and affordable international connectivity opens up huge potentials for SIDS. As has been seen in the Pacific Islands, once a cable has landed, there's a huge change in the situation available to people. So to this end, ITU works in assisting SIDS in their spectrum management and the choice of appropriate technical standards. That's very important so that they benefit from the economies of scale coming from worldwide harmonization. ITU advises on the best legal and regulatory framework for SIDS to implement digital transformation and capitalize on the fourth industrial revolution. We also help SIDS carry out a national assessment of their innovation capabilities so as to identify whatever gaps there are and how to set about addressing them. Cost-based tariffs should be the guiding principle, coupled with universal access to ensure that no one is left behind and that digital and gender divides are narrowed. Digital skills must be developed fully to take advantage of the technology. And ITU and UNICEF has an initiative called GIGA, which is to connect every school to the internet. And ITU is also working with the ILO on a digital skills project to encourage youth to take advantage of the work opportunities of the technology. As well as we have in ITU an online educational platform we call Academy, and our digital transformation centers are working to this end. We also have a new initiative to help SIDS recover from COVID, which we're currently rolling out in the Pacific. So information on all of these areas of work and initiatives is available on the ITU website. I'd like to encourage everyone to take advantage of them. And finally, let me reaffirm ITU's commitment to assist SIDS overcoming their challenges through the use of this technology. Thank you, Julia.
Mr. Johnson, thank you. And I'd like to extend that gratitude on behalf of all the members of our panel for your excellent contribution. Could you please welcome our next speaker, Mr. Nikhil Seth. Now, he is the Executive Director of the United Nations Institute for Training and Research, otherwise known as UNITAR. He has extensive experience as an international and national civil servant and has been deeply involved in leading, supporting and managing complex portfolios and intergovernmental processes. So, Nikhil Seth, the floor is now yours. You have 5 minutes. 5 minutes.
I get the message, Juliet, of the 5 minutes. Thank you. But it's such a pleasure to be with all of you today and with so many people that I've worked with and I know so very well. I wanted to just start by saying that as the UN Secretariat lead on the APIA conference on SIDS and also the Secretary of the Mauritius conference 5 years before, I was really struck by the extent to which geography determines the life and welfare of the citizens of these states. And small size, of course, means thin markets, it means lack of diversification, it means susceptibility to disasters, high transport and communications costs, and high infrastructure costs. And the main drivers of this life and welfare of citizens include the health of the oceans, obviously, fisheries in particular, and tourism, the impact of climate change, especially rising sea levels and ocean acidification, and as many people have mentioned today, the importance of regional approaches, as many of the SIDS do not have the critical mass to enjoy economies of scale in transport, in trade, and education. And of course, all the discussions we've been in on SIDS over the years in the UN, we have led to a deeper understanding on the concept of the blue economy, the oceans economy, and the special needs of SIDS in reaching the SDGs and the promises of the Samoa pathway. It's very clear to me that for these reasons that are outlined and which were outlined by Peter and by Courtney, SIDS are, ICTs were really created for SIDS in a sense. They have the potential of addressing so many, if used wisely, if the issues that were mentioned by the previous speaker on access, on skilling, on affordability of these technologies, and its proper use. Juliet, you asked someone the question on the bads of the new technology, of course, but that's not particular to SIDS. That's a global phenomena which we probably also have to address more specifically and carefully in SIDS because they are generally homogeneous societies plagued by their own problems and the power of the internet in information. People believe, they have great faith in what they read and see on the internet. So yes, there is a downside, but the potential of ICTs is so great that we really need to focus today on how we can maximize this potential. And as every speaker has said this morning, the access of reliable, affordable ICTs is key for all the pillars of sustainable development of SIDS. Education, health, empowerment of women, everything we talk about in the SDGs, it's necessary, I think, to help them grow and become more resilient to disaster risks they face. I don't want to repeat everything related to the ICTs, and I want to just focus on one area, which is an area which UNITAR specializes a great deal in, and we worked a lot with the UK Space Agency and the Commonwealth in Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, and Fiji on what we called common sensing of using satellite technology for so many things of practical use for SIDS countries. The UN Satellite Center is a part of UNITAR and UNOSAT, and we have used satellite remote sensing capabilities to support the countries that I mentioned to build resilience on the devastating impacts of climate change and improving access to climate finance. We provided training on GIS, as we call. The wonderful thing about satellite imagery is that satellites cover the same spot over a long period of time. So if you see images of 20 years and compare them, you can come up with very meaningful conclusions and policy conclusions, which are much more than 1 million words written on the same subject. So we've helped these countries in mapping their freshwater, in looking at coastal zone erosion, and of course in strengthening their applications for global funding. When it's the GCF or it's the GEF, they constantly, the small islands constantly struggle in making their case and buttressing their case with all this kind of satellite imagery information helps them a lot in accessing global finance. So satellite data and geospatial technology help improve access to global funding and for several other purposes. We have a common sensing knowledge hub. We help train trainers, and we have covered areas of food security, climate information, disaster risk reduction, and climate finance. Now, we provide technical backstopping services to them. We often link them to dedicated servers in CERN, which have tremendous computing power, which helps these countries. We have helped predict the loss and damage from various disasters. And I think we have very many interactive dashboards and maps to help the governments and field offices to make timely, cost-effective, and inclusive decisions. I think each SIDS country needs that critical mass of capacity in the different ministries, whether it's environment or land use planning or urban planning, to be able to use almost free of cost satellite imagery. If you have the capacity to analyze them, you can do much more with this technology. Of course, they need, on the ICT front, I think SIDS are doing well, but they need to do much better. They need better regulatory environments and better underwater fiber optic connectivity. The other area I just wanted to briefly mention in those 5 minutes is that in the field of education, what I've learned in UNITAR over the last 2 years, a lot of people talked about the COVID impact, but during this period, we have managed to increase our beneficiaries by 400%. We've moved from face-to-face to completely online support to countries. And that is what I realize is that the democratization of education and the unleashing of the potential of ICTs in education is probably the greatest thing that we can do for SIDS countries. Of course, there are issues which have been highlighted below on the training and skilling and access and content and formulating all these programs in ways that are small island states friendly for their citizens. But there is great potential in helping us universalize many of the skills, the education, and the things that are needed for progress in each and every one of the Sustainable Development Goals. We are always there, UNITAR, as we have helped these 3 countries that I talked about. We want to expand our work to the Indian Ocean countries, to the countries in the Caribbean, and we want to bring about this universality and access to our master's courses, to the courses we do on waste management, which is all issues which are very, very important to SIDS. So let me end there, Juliet, and say that ICTs are doing fine. They can do much better. And now we need to focus a little more on the skilling of people in the access, affordability, and use of ICTs in many of these countries. So back to you, Juliet.
Thanks very much for that, Nikhil, because look, I want to follow on from some of the points which you made there, because we know that there are large-scale connectivity projects that are actually being built in some small island developing states. They're greatly expanding job opportunities, and that's all very well and good, but it doesn't change the fact that there is still evidence of a so-called brain drain. So my question to you is, how can ICT be harnessed to upscale that education that you were referencing and also the training, especially with the youth, so that basically they may decide, well, actually, it's not worth leaving. We want to stay here.
Yeah, that's a problem, Juliet, which doesn't go away very easily in most developing countries. And it's not a SIDS problem, but what Peter said really resonates with me. We've got to learn how to use the diaspora, and bring them for the country's good. And the depth of sort of love and the need to give back to your countries is strong in the diaspora. What we have failed to do is to collectively pursue them to bring their brains back, no matter where they live. They could be in the island country or they could be in Silicon Valley, but they have so much talent to give back. Many of the things we're talking about, say satellite applications or ICT applications or skilling or education, we've got to learn of how to harness. Many of these are people under 35 with this passion of giving back to their countries. we've got to learn how to bring their brains back to work no matter where they are. So I think that's the answer of the question you posed to me, Juliet.
Mikhail, sir, thank you so much for that. And I'd like to welcome, in fact, our final speaker, who is from Bayer, and Bayer is the sponsor of this event. So please let's welcome Mrs. Natasha Santos. She is Vice President, Head of Global Stakeholders Strategy and Affairs for Bayer, which is the German multinational pharmaceutical and life sciences company. It's also one of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies too. So Natasha Santos, thank you so much for joining us. I'm now going to hand the floor to you, and you have 5 minutes. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Juliet. What a pleasure to be here with such distinguished panelists, exchanging views in a topic that is so important. Digital tools can be a lever, as mentioned by many panelists, can be a lever to accelerate the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. And today I will focus on innovation and digitalization for the agricultural sector around the world, which is my area of responsibility at Bayer. We have been witnessing, there is no doubt that digital farming represents one of agriculture's most exciting frontiers. Through advances in application technologies and science, it has the potential to help us solve one of the sector's most pressing issues, how to feed a growing population while minimizing our environmental impact. Because the more digital farming is adopted, the more precise farming can be, and the fewer resources farming uses. These are positive for the resilience and the sustainability of the system overall. Because when we combine farmers' knowledge of the land with these digitally enabled tools, we can create better economic management, as well as better in-field management practices. We can enhance soil fertility, we can stop erosion, and most important, we can limit water and land use, and increase the climate resilience, and reduce the use of farm inputs. So many digital tools are becoming especially scalable and increasingly cost efficiency. Nearly 70% of small-scale farmers around the world, this is globally covered, have mobile phones, making it easier, for example, for agronomic information, advice, and for those advices to be delivered directly to the farmer. Using those digital applications, simple digital application, smallholders can order seeds, can check the weather, can assess pest infestation, or even when available, rent and operate a drone. They can as well increase their direct market access to trade their goods. So digital applications and software are not just for large farm operations. Many tailor-made applications for small-scale farmers, such as a FarmRise app from Bayer, is a tool with the same mission and vision of digital agriculture as we have for medium and large farming operation tools. Today, this tool is used for more than 100 active users in Asian continent, for example. Another practical example I wanted to share today is around partnerships, which was mentioned by some of the panelists. Our Bayer Foundation is a funding partner, for example, of the work of the Mercy Corps ADF2 program in the African continent. In this case, the program has already designed, tested, scaled digital services and products to boost the of 2.4 million smallholders farmers in East Africa. And more importantly, 38% were women. Arafu, derived from this program, for example, is an interesting digital content and is interactive learning platform that is personalized and free for its learners, the farmers. This platform allows, for example, smart future phone users to learn via SMS, WhatsApp, Facebook, Messenger. So developing this learning platform, Arifu digitized the agribusiness traditional in-person training and product information dissemination, helping those farmers to access good agricultural practices and improve their farming activities. So other simple ideas like those can be as transformation. But the reason why they can be transformation, and because we have seen the power of those tools around the world, we believe that digital farming should be, for example, on top of government strategic agendas. Because setting the right course of action and incentives can help drive adoption and help transform the sector's sustainable future. But some aspects, of course, must be considered, a few that were mentioned today as well. We need to improve digital infrastructure in rural areas, such as broadband connectivities and mobile networks, because without access to broadband, entire communities are left behind in today's information-driven economy, particularly those in rural areas. Another aspect is to highlight positive effects of digitalization in policymaking. Digital farming enables more sustainable and resilient manner of farming. This fact should be reflected in agriculture policymaking. However, it's paramount that the digital technologies which play a role in agriculture policies offer tangible and measurable policy impacts to farmers, environment, and society as a whole. And lastly, we believe it is important to promote agriculture capacities and supporting the development of necessary skills. Some of that, I'm referencing agriculture, but a lot of that was mentioned by the panelists today as well. The wider adoption of new technologies might be hampered by the lack of possessed digital skills. Farmers may be lacking necessary capacities to identify, adopt, analyze, and successfully use digital tools, or be constrained by inadequate connectivity infrastructure. Many digital platforms and tools require an understanding, awareness, and trust on the applications and the possibility that those platforms offer to the farmers. So as stated by FAO, digital technologies are transforming today the agri-food systems. And while this is an important development everywhere, and I mentioned a few of our projects around the world, it is of a great importance to remote areas such as seeds. So the expansion of those technologies that are already improving smallholders' access to information, inputs, market, increasing production and productivity, streamlining supply chains, reducing operational costs, they are out there. So let's continue to work together to accelerate opportunities to share information and unlock potential of collaboration where possible. Thank you very much, Juliette, for the chance to share some of the private sector thinking here today. Thank you.
And thank you so much for that insight. And I'd like to put a question to you, because you talked there about the importance of digital skills, something that I'm sure we all agree on. But let's apply that to the gender technology divide that was referenced by some of our speakers. How concerned should we be about that in these small island developing states? And what does your organization believe the authorities should be doing to address it? Because the technology is out there, and as you've rightly outlined, it can really change the way that communities function, particularly in terms of agriculture. The technology can actually revolutionize the way that food is produced to feed growing populations. But again, it comes back to that gender technology divide as well.
That's a great question. And funny enough, I took a lot of notes during the day, especially on this topic. And that's a topic close to my heart as well, and not only a topic that is a priority to my organization, particularly when we think about working with the smallholders farmers and, more importantly, empowering women. We all know there's so many studies around the transformational impacts of empowering women. So what we have been doing is that all our smallholders projects work with a gender smart approach, meaning we must look at the percentage, or we must look at communities where women can be leaders and can be multipliers of technology. One way that we have seen around the world that it works is you get a woman to be the leader and multiplier in their community. You help the women to have access, to have the training, and to be an entrepreneur to their community on the benefits of that technology. And then with other people and other women on the community, it creates an ecosystem sharing knowledge. It's a peer-to-peer knowledge exchange. So it shares knowledge, but then it creates, of course, all the socioeconomic benefits of having women empowered in communities of the remote area of the world, or big countries like India, for example. So this is something that a lot of our projects focus on when we think about gender approach. And then, of course, access to finance and investment in education, particularly for women accessing areas of IT or accessing around digital technology. Target educational programs is very important and can be boosted, of course, by governments or via public public-private partnerships. So thank you for the question, Juliette. This is a very important topic that we need to have top of mind.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for that. Indeed, a big thank you to all of our panelists for your excellent contributions. But we are not done yet. I am going to ask you some further questions. But before that, let me extend my gratitude to the other co-founding partner of this GSL event, His Excellency David Doyle, Ambassador of St. Kitts and Nevis to UNESCO, also a long-standing international diplomat based in mainland Europe. So, Ambassador Doyle, I want to put the first question to you. But before I do that, we have to say goodbye to Ambassador Rattray, because I know that, again, you have to leave us, but thank you so much for contributing to this, discussion and also bringing some depth to everything that really we have heard so far. So Ambassador Rattray, thank you so much for that. He does have another speaking engagement. But Ambassador Doyle, let me turn the spotlight on you. From your perspective, can you gauge the progress that small island developing states are making in terms of improving their connectivity levels? Is it really a simple case of good, bad, or perhaps more room for improvement?
Well, quite visibly, there are huge gaps. It's very much a question of room for improvement. And just to go back to Under Secretary Rattray's point that something like 52% of all SIDS citizens have access to the internet. I mean, the question must arise, this is a chicken and egg situation. Is it because they lack the connectivity, or is it some other reason? Let me just focus, I think, my answer on optimal broadband performance. And, you know, empirical evidence shows with some conviction that if small island developing state governments, with the help of international organizations, can achieve a maximum optimal broadband performance, it has two major implications for these small island states. One, it can greatly improve market coordination. It can reduce information discord and asymmetries, and it can also, of course, greatly reduce transaction costs. All of this triggers, of course, the opening of new economic activities in the E area. Look at countries like Estonia, a small country that has gone completely digitalized, and it's done so with the help of optimal broadband performance. And the second area, where again empirical evidence is showing some degree of evidence that by making these investments in broadband, it has significant, but very significant implications in terms of student performance and achievement, particularly at primary school level. So, I mean, quite visibly, these are two important issues where ICT has some direct implications. But there are four, as I see it, major challenges that small island states have to overcome. The first is ensuring competition quality. It's not just enough to show that they have sufficient quantity of competition, but we also need the right quality as well, which can help to drive down costs, improve coverage, and improve, obviously, the quality of services. Secondly, duopoly. And this, again, seems to be a general consensus on the part of ICT experts that a small market size is not an excuse to sustain a duopoly type situation. Thirdly, the impact of so-called over-the-top internet services. These go beyond cable, broadcasting, and satellite TV to provide a range of services like WhatsApp and Skype, which have actually led to a massive reduction across the SIDS in terms of traditional fixed telephony services. But the issue is it has to be part, this new over-the-top, as it were, internet-type services have to be part of the overall ICT mix. And last but not least, and the critical issues for me, is securing improved international connectivity via submarine cable networks. And again, there's an overwhelming consensus showing that those SIDS countries that do not operate or are not linked up to submarine cable operations have a distinct competitive disadvantage. So let me just talk about four areas that SIDS could consider in terms of expanding its broadband connectivity. First of all, piggybacking. There's actually a lot of evidence to show that submarine cables planned in certain destinations or already in existence bypass many small island developing states in the Pacific and the Caribbean and the Indian Ocean and elsewhere. And in some cases, they pass very close by individual member states of small islands who have either a single, as it were, link or may have no link whatsoever. There seems to be a lot of compelling evidence to show that we need a legal instrument, we need a legal framework, and this is where international organizations like the ITU, UNITAR, maybe UNESCO can intervene to ensure and work with SIDS in terms of developing appropriate policies for piggybacking vis-a-vis links, submarine cable links vis-a-vis other members, other states. Secondly, island hopping, the notion that a group of small island states can actually pool resources, which is more effective in terms of the necessary economies of scale and to justify the return of investment. Minimizing barriers to entry is another important issue. We still have massive barriers. This may require, of course, to provide major ICT companies with tax waivers, wholesale access to local markets, reducing overheads such as licensing fees, land costs for landing stations, and low cable landing fees. A combination of those could help to provide a much more attractive inward investment environment. And the other major issue linked to this, of course, is the ensuring open access, ensuring that that ownership and control by one or two maximum providers does not become, as it were, the modus operandi. It's quite visibly not the way forward. But in order to do this, you need to have, and governments need to adopt an open access policy. In other words, the same conditions for all the operators who would probably require the governments to set up a special purpose vehicle in which operators across the world would purchase shares that provide them with access to amount of bandwidth corresponding to the size of their actual share investment. And last but not least, regional hubs. I think there's a number of cases, notably in the Pacific, where significant transit points and hubs already exist in countries like Fiji, which have been used by Tonga, Vanuatu, Samoa, in order to ensure onward connectivity via Australia and the United States. But let me just, as it were, conclude by saying all of this does not obviate the need to have a national ICT strategy. And this, again, is where international organizations, notably those on this particular panel, can help sit down with these small island developing states and work out a structured, tangible national ICT strategy that suits each of the member states in turn. Last but not least, clearly there are issues relating to skills or skill gaps that need to be filled. And indeed, the research is showing that these skill gaps are sometimes more important than the development of hardware limitations. But clearly these need to be put into the mix in looking very carefully at the national ITC strategy. Thank you, Juliet.
Thank you very much for that response, Ambassador Doyle. And I actually want to pick up on something which you mentioned there. That was the duopoly. And I want to put this out to our audience. And in fact, Peter Canella-Rie, if you can address this point, because look, the duopoly, does it hamper choice in small island developing states? And more to the point, does it also impede the level of take-up?
Yeah, I think that definitely has an impact. And I think it differs as you go from island to island as well, in terms of the actual impact of those duopoly. But I think the main challenges that is faced perhaps for majority of the SIDS is really the issue of cost. That regardless of who is the player in town, internet costs are generally quite high already, and that is just something that always comes down to the perhaps the size of the market not being big enough to perhaps investors make money from. But I think those are some of the challenges going forward that we can really look into. And I think I really appreciate some of the ideas already by Ambassador Doyle there about these special vehicles, more work on the regional side. These are already in existence, some of them. But I think moving forward, I see those as low-hanging fruits, in terms of getting folks together and discussing really concrete things to address things like the internet costs and bringing those down. For example, Solomon Islands, we benefited from Australian aid, so they pulled a cable, our first ever fiber optic cable. From Sydney down through to Solomon Islands. And in the middle of the Coral Sea, they split it up. One goes to Port Moresby in Papua New Guinea, and one comes to Honiara in the Solomon Islands. And that was something that was given. Pretty much the cost was borne by the Australian government. And that was something that was made at a political level. There were, of course, geopolitics at play that ended up with that kind of a specific arrangement. But those are areas of opportunity that small islands definitely are always on the lookout for, and working together with partners together.
Yeah, the importance of partnership. And of course,
Yes.
Bayer has certainly intimated that they're willing to work with many small island developing states. Sadly, we've had to lose Natasha. Everybody has to go to meetings. That's always the tragedy of these things. But we will soldier on, because there is still plenty of ground to cover in the few minutes which are available. And again, I want to put this out to all of you, because clearly there is a lot of work that has to be done. Progress has been made, but there is still some ground to cover. Excuse me. Some ground to cover. What I'd like to know is what effect, what impact is that Gulf having on innovation in the region? Because the real danger is that SIDS are potentially missing out on the disruptive benefits from new technologies that we hear a great deal about, such as blockchain and AI.
Yes, I think if I can, thank you, Juliet. That is definitely something that I'm very much aware and very concerned about, us missing out. And I think that comes down to the fact that many of the companies that do set up here, of course, are profit, oriented, and they want to make the best out of that in terms of the situation in the market, including the high cost of internet and SIDS. But I think when it comes to the specific issue, the idea of that diaspora comes back. The idea that you have already out there some very well qualified SIDS. With SIDS, we're talking about population size; they're not very big, but there's some very, very high qualified SIDS around already that are willing to help. I think a platform might need to be set that they would be able to lend their considerable talents there, because I think you mentioned earlier as well, the brain drain issue is a real issue for small islands that will continue to be there. We perhaps cannot stop it, but I think we might need to be smarter in terms of getting small islanders on board and helping out. Regardless of where they are, and ICT is a perfect model for that, because they can work from remotely and help us out with our issues going forward as well.
Sure. And I'd like to put this question as well to Ambassador Doyle and Ambassador Chatterton, because look, given the difficulties that we are seeing, issues about the take-up rate and the level of ICT penetration, etc., it is essentially uneven. The real worry is that some SIDS will be more or less advanced in their growth than others. And shouldn't we really be concerned about that, given that these countries are also dealing with issues arising from their geography?
Yeah, I can perhaps offer some thoughts here. I mean, one of the big challenges in any small island developing state, 38 of them recognized by the UN system, is a limited pool of talent. That's the way we refer to these islands. You get some very talented people, but there are very few of them. And when it comes to developing and building regulatory capacity, developing applications and services associated with ICT, SIDS really does suffer from a chronic shortage of both software developers and the kind of innovative entrepreneurs that enable and galvanize, ecosystems that are normally associated with bigger countries. But, here, this is where, again, I go back to, the role of international organizations, the UN family of organizations. The UN World Bank, for instance, has a very innovative, very compelling, successful entrepreneurship program for innovation in the Caribbean, which was launched a number of years ago, which helps to develop, high-tech startups through connection to several components with other large developed states. So perhaps what we need to do is to expand this World Bank Entrepreneurship for Innovation program, perhaps link it up with some input from ITU, from UNITAR on the training and educational side, perhaps from UNESCO as well, and maybe the World Bank, which has the financial capacity to be able to advise in this area of financing innovation. But quite visibly, this has to be done, though, on a transnational basis. It is not the role of any one UN organization. And we need to, I think, come together and build and galvanize the best of experience across the entire UN family, but also not to exclude, by the way, the European Union and other international organizations, and indeed non-government organizations that have some expertise in this area of developing software developers and innovative entrepreneurs. Jean-Paul, perhaps you have something to say?
Yes, the real question, Juliette, is the issue of world integration. If I speak of the Pacific region, David is coming from Caribbean Islands. It is 8 to 9 hours of plane. When you go to Solomon Islands, and it is the closest country from Europe, the first one, just 2 hours and a half from Australia, from Paris, you must fly and spend time in airports for about 30 hours. So it is 60 hours to go and to come back. And we are talking of one of the specific issues related to the SIDS and to the Pacific, which is ICT. But globally, we should find a way of integrating these countries in the world concert. I welcome, since 12 years, I have been ambassador of Solomon Islands. I welcome from time to time delegations from the country I represent. And they are very competent, very active. We have a lot of contacts. Every minister does his best. But when he is back, he is in another world. And as Peter said, ICTs are the key to integration, but it is so difficult to realize integration because the lack of communication and the difficulties of traveling to these countries. So I have been pleading at UNESCO and other international organizations for Pacific to be considered as a continent in itself. When I was at school, I learned that Pacific was a continent. And now we are put together with other Far Eastern countries, and we are not helped in the way of integration. And it is a long fight, a long process, and I am very happy that a man like Peter Kenny Laurea is now chairing the Parliamentary Assembly of ACP, because it is a priority. We cannot be out of the game. We cannot be out of the game because there is a lack of human resources. There is a lack of financial resources. The diplomatic network of Pacific states is very, very low. They don't have enough diplomats. They are not represented. When I go to FAO meetings in Roma, all Pacific countries are represented on the paper, but I am the only Pacific ambassador. So excuse me to say these words, but it is a real problem. And of course, ICT allows to do what we are doing, and it is exceptional that we can speak with Peter, who is actually in Honiara, and having this connection, but it is not enough. So I try to work, I try to improve the things, and we must, all of us, find new ways of what is called world integration. Thank you, Juliette.
And thank you for that, Ambassador Cateron. I would like to allocate the final question in the few minutes that we have remaining to Peter Kenilorea, because look, we know that most SIDS operate on the basis of a small number of ICT suppliers, obviously because of their market size. But the challenge, I guess, is to ensure that international regulatory oversight is robust and at the same time sustainable enough to ensure that SIDS get a fair, transparent, market-driven contract. The word harmonization was mentioned earlier in this discussion. So how can you ensure this will happen?
Yes, thank you very much. And I think it's very much linked to the integration issue as well, that Ambassador Cateron just mentioned. Harmonization, I think, is one of these issues that even in small islands, there's always problems trying to harmonize, particularly in the Pacific. When we talk about regional integration, I think the Caribbean does it a little bit better than the Pacific, especially right down to economic. The Caribbean, I think, does that a little bit more better. Pacific, I think, as Ambassador Cateron Jean-Paul had mentioned, the geographic dispersion is just so large that it's in itself is really a deterrent to us getting into integration and, of course, harmonizing. So there is also this idea that we have still some baggage left over from our colonial masters. So a lot of them were the ones who were running the ICT after independence, even. Cable and wireless was everywhere. They were here in the Solomons for a long time, and then they was taken over by government outfits, still owned by big share by government. So that is how ICT has been running, and lately the companies have come on board and tried to get a slice of the pie. But I think in terms of harmonization, there are certain linkages that has some baggages to do with flying the flag, kind of a thing, with certain entities, particularly with airlines. You can see that everybody wants their own airlines, that sort of thing, and everybody's running at a loss. But it's just because of their pride and because of that a flag carrier that everybody does that. And to a certain extent, I see that as well with these fields like ICT, where it's quite expensive. The equipments keep on changing every second year, in terms of updating. It's very expensive exercise. If we need to be in touch with the rest of the world, these technologies are changing rapidly. And sometimes it can be quite a burden to try and keep up with everybody else, and we get left behind. So, for example, in the Solomons, we had that wonderful fiber optic cable that's been laid, our first ever. But when it got here, our telecom towers were out of date. So they were outdated. So we're still not benefiting from the real speed that we were promised. And that is because of our towers are not don't have the latest equipment to handle that speed, and these things keep changing almost every year. So I think harmonization, and when it comes to regulations, we will continue to depend on international organization with the ITU that will continue to lead and guide us. The World Bank has been very instrumental in terms of uptake and supporting some of the telecommunications companies here in the Pacific, but also in the Caribbean as well. In terms of that, I don't want to name these companies, but they've been involved. And I think going forward, there will still continue to be a need for that, in terms of support for SIDS. It is just the way it is. Until costs come down, we are waiting for satellite to be a big player for small islands, because I think the overhead costs might be a bit lower in terms of infrastructure setup. As a member of parliament, I set up 7 satellite dishes for my high school in my constituency, which is a very, perhaps in the Solomons, one of the least developed constituencies, in terms of that. And I put them to the 7 high schools. And that has made transformative changes just in the last 4 months since I was able to facilitate that for them. And it's the first in the Solomon Islands. They have never done that in terms of other honorables working on that, because many people don't see ICT as infrastructure here in Solomon Islands. Infrastructure has still got that classic definition of a road and a bridge, and in the small islands, a lot of wharves and jetties. And yes, they do involve that. But ICT is a major infrastructure nowadays. And it's slowly starting to resonate. But until governments, including in SIDS, start to pick up on that seriously, we will continue to struggle. That's how I feel, in terms of that realization that this is a crucial infrastructure for us, just like that road that we've been working on for how many years now. So that is where I think we really need to work. It comes back to the national governments. Regional harmonization, I think, will continue on through the assistance of ITU, and that will continue for some time, and we look forward to working with them.
That's a very optimistic note on which to end this. To everybody here, thank you so much for your participation, and also to those of our panel who had to leave us because they had to attend various meetings, etc. But the contributions were most welcome, and there are grounds for optimism. There is a willingness for people to partner up, to work together, to bridge those gaps, because we've explored the importance of technology to SIDS states, the differences that they can make, and there's been no running away from the intricacies of the issues that are involved. They are very, very forensic, but there is no fear in taking these on and winning, because at the end of the day, the SIDS states, they have skin in the game, to take that phrase from you, Ambassador Calderon. But there we must leave it. Thank you so much, and good luck going forward, and I hope to meet you again in the not too distant future. Thank you.